Und zum Thema dranbleiben, sich weiterentwickeln, lernen, haben wir jetzt eine spannende Referentin, Dr. Karolien Notebaert. Das Interessante ist, dass sie Neurowissenschaftlerin ist und Buchautorin, dass sie in der Goethe Business School arbeitet und ihr Vortrag heißt Intuition in der Neuroökonomie. Oder, sie sagt, so könnte man es einfach sagen, wie man auf natürliche Art und Weise die eigene Gehirnleistung verbessern kann. All das, was sie so in der Forschung herausfindet, setzt sie auch bei sich selbst um, sagt sie. Sie ist nämlich Bergsteigerin und auch ganz aktiv im Hochseilgarten und hat ihre Leistungen dort auch durch ihre Forschungsmethoden, das, was sie herausgefunden hat, verbessert. Sie ist aber nicht nur Bergsteigerin und fast kann man sagen Extrembergsteigerin. Sie spielt auch Geige und Klavier und ist Mutter zweier Töchter. Ich würde Karolien Notebaert jetzt bitten. Haben wir sie schon da? Ja, wundervoll. Danke. Dr. Karolien Notebaert. Sie inspiriert auch in Leadership-Seminaren und Management-Trainings, macht in diesem Bereich auch Workshops und ist Keynote-Speakerin in dem Bereich und lässt uns jetzt teilhaben an dem Wissen, wie wir unsere eigene Gehirnleistung verbessern können.
Genau.
Danke.
So ist es. Good morning to all of you. I hope you still have a bit of energy left for the last speech of the morning. I promise to keep it short and crispy. And before I'm going to start giving my talk, I will tell you that about 7 years ago, I started a trip in my life. I'm still on this trip. I learned a lot scientifically, but also from experience. And it's exactly this trip that I have taken for the last 7 years that I'm going to share with you tonight, theoretically and also by an experience, in a few slides and in 30 minutes. Quite a challenge, so I better get started. Before I'm going to start, I will give you an introduction into neuroscience, an introduction which summarizes the most important findings with respect to performance over the last 10 to 15 years, and this only in a few slides, so at least you understand at the end of the speech how your brain can bring a better performance. If I would look inside your brain, and this is absolutely no surprise, I can tell you that your brain is never at rest. There's always a lot of things happening inside our brain. That's nothing new to you, but what might be new to you is that this spontaneous activation that you constantly experience in your brain, that it works as a filter. And to show you how that works as a filter, I'm going to do a small experiment with you. And for this experiment, I'm going to divide the full group in 2 groups. And to make it very easy, I'm just going to split the group into males and females. So the females is the first group, the males the second group. And when I start the experiment, I'm going to ask all the males to close their eyes, and I'm going to show the females a picture. After that, I'm going to ask the females to close their eyes, and then all the men, I'm going to tell them they can open their eyes and they're going to see that picture. Then you all close your eyes. Then I'm going to change the slide into a word that consists of 4 letters, but the first letter is missing. And when I say open your eyes, all of you together, as quickly, as loudly as you can, you're going to complete the word. Understood? It's a long explanation for a very short experiment. I tested it with my kids and they did quite fine. So there we go. I'm going to ask the males now to close their eyes. All men in the room, please close your eyes. All women, please close your eyes. Now the males, the men in the room, you can open your eyes. Now you all close your eyes. Now you can all open your eyes and very loudly and quickly... Sorry? I heard different words, and I did a very small experiment with you, the females, the women, and this was just by accident, they got a pan, which is related to cooking, and the men, they got this picture, and then I asked you to complete the word, and most of the women, I think, said cook, not because they're women, but just because they saw the pan, and then the men, they probably said book. What did I do? With one short image, I manipulated the spontaneous activation in your brain, and with this spontaneous activation, you gave that word a meaning. And it was funny because it was an experiment, but this happens all the time in work. We talk about the project that objectively looks the same to all of you, but with your unique spontaneous activation, you process it and you give it a meaning. And we don't talk about those differences, and this leads to huge misunderstandings and potential conflicts. This spontaneous activation in the brain, this changes all the time, like you have experienced right now, but it is also relatively stable. And what I mean with that is that if I were able at this moment to measure the spontaneous activation in your brain, with a very large precision, I would be able to predict your personality and the decisions you make, for example, with respect to cooperation and trust. I don't have time to say more about that, but I just wanted to show you how important this spontaneous activation is. This spontaneous activation that you have in the brain is not just random there, but it's quite well organized. It's organized in what we call functional networks. It's like a collection of brain structures that like to synchronize their activation, and those who synchronize their activation, we call it a functional network, and one network is very important for the talk I'm going to give, namely the default mode network. Like a computer has default settings, you also have your default settings with which you process the world. And this is called biologically your default mode network. So what is in your default mode network? Well, we already talked this morning about the monkey in our brain who's chatting all the time. The thoughts you have, which are related to your personality, related to your emotions, related to the identity you have, experiences, and so on and so forth, they are being produced by your default mode network. You're also with me? So to summarize what I've just mentioned, there is a lot of input we have all the time. You're hearing things, you're tasting things, you're seeing things. That input is being processed by your default mode network, and this is influencing your decision-making and also your behavior. But I was here to talk about performance, but still this introduction was quite important. If I talk about performance, I use a very easy-to-understand definition, namely that performance stands for the potential you have inside of you minus your interferences. We all have potential, there is no doubt about that. Let me give you an example to make this definition clear. Let's say you have a great potential to sing. When you're at home in the shower, you give your best, greatest performance, your full potential to singing, you bring it out. All of a sudden I ask you now to come on stage and to sing for the audience unexpectedly, what is very likely going to happen. You're not bringing your best performance. And why is that? It's because all of a sudden we experience fear, bad thoughts, negative emotions, stress. These are our so-called internal interferences that make it that you cannot access your full potential to sing. And this we see all the time. So what is it that I need to increase my performance or to access my potential in a better way? I need something to reduce those internal interferences. And this is what we call self-regulation. Self-regulation is the most important thing for your performance. It's not intelligence. Honestly, the differences in intelligence are not that huge. But it is your capacity to deal with your internal interferences. And this is the message I want to share with you today. What are those internal interferences that I'm talking about? In fact, I already mentioned them. I use four kinds here. We have the feelings, and I'm not saying feelings are bad because they're very important. But if you talk about stress and very strong negative feelings, they absolutely block your potential, especially feelings of fear. We have impulses. The impulse to constantly look at the phone, even though you're not expecting something, is very bad for the brain performance. We have the thoughts, and in fact, I can tell you that it's also your thoughts, and you probably know that cause your emotions. Why are you nervous today, even though your meeting is only taking place tomorrow? It's because you think about it. Why do you have fear to do a certain activity? It's because you have particular thoughts and beliefs about that. So only if you're just a master of your thoughts, you're also a master of your emotions. Let me give you an example. Let's say you worked on a project and unexpectedly you receive negative feedback. What is going to happen? If you care about your job, you will have something that happens inside your head, inside your body. You will have a strong emotion. You will very likely have the impulse to interrupt, defend your opinion, and so on and so forth. And this happens automatically. And it's important that it happens because it shows you your job is important to you. However, what follows then is a reaction that we all can see. And this reaction, if I ask people, does it also come automatically? Many people will say yes. But the answer is it doesn't have to be that way. Because if you are capable of recognizing this reaction tendency in the middle, and if you're able to regulate it, I can tell you that this is your decisional freedom. Because you can decide, no matter what happens outside of you, no matter what happens inside of you, but you choose your reaction. So how does it work in the brain? And I just summarized that here. Well, I can tell you that most of these internal interferences that block our potential are being caused by a particular brain area which we call the amygdala, which is very deep inside our brain, and it's quickly activated. When you get negative feedback, straight away, bam, you have the emotion. It makes that you feel the emotion, as I already mentioned, and the emotion is important. It tells you what's important to you and what not. However, if we talk about fear, we talk about stress, this absolutely blocks our potential. But which brain structure do we need then to bring a good performance, to make good decisions, to do the intuitive thinking, the positive thinking, the solution thinking, and so on? We need a totally different brain area, namely the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is in front of your brain, and this is a part of the brain that works absolutely different compared to the amygdala. Namely, you need to give some effort to activate it. You cannot always think of great solutions. You need some mental energy to think of good solutions. Beside that, the prefrontal cortex is responsible for all your executive functions: planning, organizing, analyzing information, thinking about solutions. In fact, everything you need for a very good performance. And now the bad news comes, but I will end with good news. The bad news is that this part of the brain, the prefrontal cortex, has a limited capacity. And I'm not talking about the fact that you will reach this limited capacity somewhere when you are 60 or 70, that would be the good news. The bad news is we reach that limited capacity nearly every day. And to give you an example of how we reach that limited capacity, let me tell you a story about you, about what you did yesterday and what happened in your brain. For this story, I'm going to show you what happens in your amygdala area, and I'm going to show you what happens in your prefrontal cortex. And remember that ideally what we want to have very little amygdala activation, and we want to have the prefrontal cortex, the battery, the cognitive battery, we want to have it fully charged. So let me tell you the story about what happened to you yesterday. You woke up and you didn't sleep enough. We all know we need to sleep enough, but we don't do it. And if you don't sleep enough, your prefrontal cortex is not fully charged. You get out, you see it's raining outside. If it's raining outside, you're a bit in a bad mood, which means amygdala activation. And you have 2 kids, 2 girls. The youngest girl, she's 2 years old. And even though it's raining outside, she absolutely wants to put on a summer dress. So what do? You negotiate with your kid. This is what I do. This also takes quite a lot of energy from your prefrontal cortex, but finally you reach the car, you're stuck in traffic, you come in work way too late, you have no time for the first coffee of the day, which is quite important after a morning like that. Your day is absolutely fully booked, you're dealing with clients who are not happy, you are leading meetings, you get negative feedback from the top, and all the time you're dealing with politics at work, which is also one of these jobs for which you need your prefrontal cortex, but then finally it's time to come home. Ah, there it is. And this is the moment that your amygdala is getting free play and your mental battery is absolutely empty, and this is the time we're supposed to have the best time of our life. But this is what happens in your brain. Anyway, we're not done yet, because when you're at home, your kids, they also have a battery, but it's very tiny, very quickly empty, and kids with an empty battery, what do? They fight. So the kids are fighting, you're trying to settle down the fight, you're trying to make the food at the same time, the food burns, your partner comes home and your partner suggests you to perhaps take some cooking lessons, and this is the moment you lose control. This happened to you yesterday, right? So I'm quite happy you're here today. So when we lose control, and I would not blame you for that, but this is absolutely normal. And how does your brain look like? Well, if you would look inside your brain the moments we lose control or the moments we have this mental blockage, what you would see in your brain, and you can guess it from my story, is we would have a lot of amygdala activation. You're in a very bad mood. You have a very negative glasses on. And on top of that, the connection between your amygdala activation and your prefrontal cortex has become dysfunctional. So even if you had some battery left, it's not going to bring you anything. And just a very short story to show you to what bad consequences this can lead. It's a story about something that happened in the States in 2014. A young boy, 15 or 16, he goes into a grocery shop and he takes a few donuts and drinks and he goes out without paying. In the shop, what happens? The shop owner, he calls the police. What happened outside, a movie was taken from that, and I've seen it several times. What happened? The police pulls over, 2 policemen get out of the car, they take their gun and they yell, "Put your hands where we can see them." The guy who was just standing there without any weapon did something very unexpectedly. He made one step forward, he raised his hands and he yelled, "Shoot me." And what happened? Within a few milliseconds, one policeman shoots and the other one shoots as well. And the kid dies. And why is that? It's not that those policemen were not trained to do the right thing, which was not the right thing. But this entire training, these entire procedures on how to deal with that situation, it's stuck in my prefrontal cortex. And I have no access to that. And this type of situation, this is, by the way, what we call depletion in our brain, we see that unfortunately in many companies. And this too much of amygdala activation that we experience under pressure and constantly information reaching us, this is leading to many, many problems in companies. So I asked myself the question a long time ago, how can we reduce amygdala activation and how can we restore our energy level in our prefrontal cortex? Because this is the key to high performance, and I also have found the answer to that. So the answer lies in self-regulation, and before I give you the solution to that, let me tell you that there's 2 ways of self-regulation. One type of self-regulation is what you all know. I'm quite sure there's plenty of procedures out there, which is what we call the cognitive self-regulation strategies. It's the procedures that we use to download or reduce our amygdala activation. But the downside is that these strategies rely on the prefrontal cortex. It's like do ABCD when you're in stress. But ABCD is in my prefrontal cortex, and I need my prefrontal cortex to reduce my stress, so it doesn't work. So I started to ask myself, is there not something like what we call a non-cognitive self-regulation strategy with which I can reduce amygdala activation and preserve energy in the prefrontal cortex? And this non-cognitive self-regulation strategy, as I already mentioned, I found that, and this is a strategy that does not use the prefrontal cortex, but nevertheless reduces amygdala activation and besides has a lot of other positive effects on the brain. And the two main effects, I've summarized them for you, is one, and this is what I was hoping for, we get more volume in the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex just also functions much better. It's like the cognitive battery is functioning much better if you apply this technique that I'm about to describe to you. The second effect, and this was the effect that also made me at least try it out, this technique, is that if you practice this technique regularly, your amygdala, which is the source of many problems, they reduce their activation and they also become smaller. So just pure biologically, I already felt I found something quite important, which is the key to high performance. You don't have to read that, it's also in German, but this is just to show you how many studies have shown positive effects of this particular technique. And before I'm going to name you the technique, or call it by its name, this technique, let me show you, just to come to an end, how this technique, the key to high performance, how that works inside your brain. As you remember, I mentioned at the start of my talk that there is a network in the brain, a very dominant network, which is very likely active with you right now, and which is causing your thoughts, and your thoughts are causing your emotions, and so on and so forth. Your default mode network, you do remember that, right? Well, the technique that I'm going to explain to you uses a totally different network in the brain. And it's a network that we all have, and we can all activate this, but we seldom do that. And this network is called the direct experience network. And now, why is this so important? And this for me was also important to understand why this technique has so many advantages, and this is the beauty of how nature has designed us. These two networks cannot be activated together. This means that if you activate the direct experience network, you will shut out your default mode network, those 80,000 thoughts that you produce per day. And it's exactly this what this technique does. You switch between those networks. Do you already know which technique I'm talking about? I'm talking here about mindfulness. Mindfulness in German you say Achtsamkeit. I don't really like the word Achtsamkeit. I work with the word mindfulness. I think it fits much better. But as a neuroscientist, I can tell you I'm extremely skeptical. And the first time that I read mindfulness, I thought straight away, this has to do with putting candles in your ears and all that. I'm not going to do it. So I put it aside. No offense to whoever puts candles in their ears. I've never tried it. But I was just very skeptical because straight away I thought I was doing something esoteric. So as a scientist, I confess to you, I really needed to understand this to the detail before even trying it out. And it's only at that moment in my trip, and we're talking about a few years, that I started to try it. Yeah? With the typical science things, we know how to cooperate, but we don't do it. Same it was with mindfulness here. And how you actually activate this direct experience network, you all have done that already today. You activate the direct experience network by bringing your attention to one of your senses, such as feeling, smelling, listening, but without getting involved into the thoughts, which is a default mode network that at some point will become activated. So when you did that exercise this morning with Frau Grimm, she asked you to bring your attention back to your breathing or to your heart. You can also bring your attention to your skin if you want that. If you bring for 100% your attention to one of your senses, you will activate your direct experience network and you will shut out your default mode network, your thoughts, your images in your mind. But what is going to happen, I promise you that, within a few milliseconds, at best a bit longer, the default mode network is there again. Chat, 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 chat. Yeah? Or images that you have in your mind. And that's absolutely fine. That just means your brain is working properly, the default mode network is still there. We observe it, and we bring the attention back to the direct experience network. This is how you practice mindfulness. This mindfulness story here, we know this as meditation, and I believe perhaps it's the word meditation that makes people think it's something esoteric, but I can tell you it's absolutely nothing like that. And this meditation, this consists of 3 steps, which I just described to you. Most of the time we do this with our eyes closed. So what you do, you focus or you bring your attention to one of your senses with which you activate your direct experience network. What will happen? Your default mode network, the dominant one, is there again, which means your thoughts, they wander. It's the default mode network. But the good thing is you notice that the default mode network is being activated. And once you notice that, you bring your attention back to one of your senses, and with this you activate your direct experience network. So it's always this changing or switching between those 2 networks. And even though mindfulness is known as a meditation at the Goethe Business School, where I also train, we also believe, and I think this is quite important, that mindfulness is not just like a meditation or a hype or whatever, it's actually a quality of life. And with everything that is about to happen in the future, the digitalization, more information we get, all those happenings, those events that are happening in the future, good leadership, and this is my belief, can only happen when you have this quality with you. Thank you for your attention.
Karolien, thank you very much. I remember when I heard your talking, especially about your personal experience as well. When I was at Google, they tried to bring mindfulness into performance business. So they said, if you are mindful enough and if you understand, not react immediately, but have the freedom between action and reaction, then you'll be a higher performer. So my understanding, when I combine the 2 speeches which we heard from Helmut Lind and which we heard from you, if you bring mindfulness together with an intention, what do you want to achieve in this world? What do you want to do with your company? What is your purpose and what is your task? Then I think you can become very powerful. Thank you very much for this amazing speech. Thank you.